Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this solo edition, at least for now, of the Bengal Tiger Podcast. I'm Billy Embody. We're going to be joined by Andy Staples of On3's national team here in just a few minutes. But I do want to tell you guys about our friend Andy Ludicky at myperfectfranchise.net. Andy Ludicky can help you through the franchise ownership process. He is a franchise consultant and a franchise owner himself. So if you're looking to leave that corporate rat race for the American dream, or if you're looking to diversify your portfolio, build wealth, leave a legacy for your family, Andy, being that franchise consultant at myperfectfranchise.net, can help you go through this process to find a franchise that fits your skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit to it, and all the things that maybe stand in the way at this very moment of you becoming a franchise owner yourself. His services are 100% free. He's here to help, and that's why we've partnered with him at the Bengal Tiger and on3.com. Good supporter of us. He's able to give you guys all the feedback that you might need when evaluating this process. All you have to do is get on his calendar, Andy, A-N-D-Y, at myperfectfranchise.net, or give him a call, 404-973-9901. Reach out to Andy at myperfectfranchise.net for more information on how to change your life with franchise ownership today. Like I mentioned, we are going to bring on Andy Staples. I brought him on to have a conversation around LSU spring game, the national landscape, the SEC, and also the NFL draft. Andy had Cortez Hankton, LSU's co-offensive coordinator, on his podcast on the On3 National YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, subscribe today. A lot of great content with Andy, J.D. Pickell, Josh Newberg, Phil Dukes, all the guys bringing it for you guys from our national team across the country, really, for On3. But really good conversation with Andy, and he is able to sit back from the national perspective and really kind of evaluate what maybe LSU has going into the fall and compare it a little bit better than maybe some people that are in our little silos of covering our teams. We're just not as, able to be as flexible when we're in that vacuum of the transfer portal and recruiting and all of those things. But that's why we have guys like Andy and JD to reach out to and give you guys kind of a little bit more of a feel. And look, he's been doing this for many, many years covering college football. And one of the premier voices out there is with us at On3 with Andy Staples. So looking forward to our conversation together. A lot of fun we had, and we'll have him back on again. But I am back, obviously, on the podcast circuit for our Bengal Tiger subscribers, and just wanted to pass along my takeaways from LSU spring game. I got a chance to watch it a couple times with some of these early morning, late nights that we've had, and just kind of sitting around with a little bit of a weird schedule with our baby boy now with us. And so I wanted to share some of the brief takeaways that I had, and Andy and I will talk more about it. And obviously Matthew and Shay have covered a lot of the takeaways at thebengaltiger.com, which you can subscribe to for just $1 for 2 months using code LSU1. That's LSU, the number 1. But I want to chime in too. So for just a few minutes, humor me before we get to our interview with Andy Staples. You can skip ahead, of course, if you'd like. But let's talk about the offense. Garrett Nussmeier, I think, is really going to have the opportunity to have a strong season. And I think him waiting his turn and continuing to develop and chip away at the things that he needed to work on is happening. It's not something where you look at Garrett and you say, oh, he's stuck around. He's done what, quarterbacks don't do nationally anymore. It's his time. He's going to be great. That's not enough of a reason to think it's going to work out and it's going to be great. I just think Garrett has continued to actually improve and work at what he's needed to when it comes to his game and getting better. And so when you see the spring game and you couple that with the performance against Wisconsin and what he was able to do, he's in really good shape to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC in just his first year as a starter. He's been able to get some game experience. But this defense that he was going against in the spring game, nothing to write home about. And we knew that. They're still addressing needs like at the defensive tackle spot. We know they need to upgrade the cornerback room and adjust the expectations for really where things are going to be for that unit heading into 2024. To do that, they need to bring in a corner if they can find one. Otherwise, it is just going to be a year of growing pains for what will be probably a young cornerback room that just is just not going to be up to LSU standards. But that's why you brought Corey Raymond back. That's why you brought Bo Davis in to address those two spots and really improve them. What I do feel like is LSU is going to be improved organizationally from the defensive perspective because of what Blake Baker brings, and he'll get the guys to buy in a little bit more. Just at the end of the Madhouse era, it just got bad, and I think there are a lot of reasons why, but where some of those reasons were, I think Blake Baker immediately fixed. He brought in a lot of credibility for this defensive staff, just being the one heading it up, being from, familiar with LSU, returning. Damone Clark was at the spring game. This is a staff that has plenty of skins on the wall, so they know what they're doing. It's just going to take a minute. But to go back to the offense and what I saw from Garrett, you saw him take advantage of low-hanging fruit with the coverage bust that led to that touchdown pass to Xavier Thomas. You saw him be able to distribute the ball and make all the different throws that really he needs to. It wasn't perfect. There were certain opportunities that he had that if it's a real game, you probably want back, but he showed enough that you feel really good about the quarterback spot going into next year. I feel the same way about the running back room. I think that's the strongest unit behind the offensive line on this roster. I just feel like the floor is very high with Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams coming back. If you get Trey Holly back and then you add Caden Durham, the floor has a chance to be pretty high. And you can talk about the receiver room being a room that has talent and added talent, but I just feel like there are a little bit more unknowns for me with that group. But the running back room, I love the development of Caleb Jackson. I love what Josh Williams brings from a consistency perspective. And if you look at what Joe Sloan and the staff have done to the blocking scheme alone, I loved kind of the diversity that they brought offensively in some of the run blocking schemes. I felt like it kind of popped some more runs. Now, some bad tackling played into that, but I just felt like the running backs were kind of teed up for a little bit more success. Remember, this is a running back group that really didn't have much depth to show off in the spring game, that's for sure. You had some walk-ons in there and things like that, but they still made plays. They took advantage of their opportunities. Josh Williams had a nice touchdown run with a quality jump cut. Caleb Jackson continues to, be probably one of the more talked about players for LSU overall heading into next season. He's kind of got that stardom written all over him potentially if he can realize that. He had a nice run that I noticed, and I don't want to dive too far down into depth charts and things like that. And Matthew Shea, we can all kind of pitch in on this over the course of the offseason, but I just felt like the run game made a lot of nice quality, like pop plays to them. That between that and the blocking scheme with the offensive line and the tight ends, they really made happen themselves versus a busted coverage Xavier Thomas, touchdown that Nuss had to step up and take advantage of. But I like to see something schemed up well and executed, and I felt like the run game really showed that in the spring game. So the offense, you feel good about where things are at with the offensive line. 4 returning starters, DJ Chester taking over. We'll continue to, watch that development from DJ Chester. That'll be a guy that a lot of people have their eyes on to eventually be a draft pick. I mean, he was really impressive coming out of high school in the state of Georgia and has quickly taken to that center role. But if you flip over to the defensive side, it was kind of like they were playing almost like a ones versus twos when it came to the interior that they had to deal with of that defensive line. It's why they're going out in the transfer portal and addressing it so heavily. And then when you get to the linebackers, I felt like tackling was poor. Felt like tackling as a whole could have been a lot better overall. But there are obviously still some bright spots for this group. And if you look up and down it, you look at Gabe Relaford and what he was able to do. I felt like, I believe it was Braden Swinson just scrolling down my notes. Paris Shand really is the one that I circled him a couple times, just from having some pressures and making some plays difficult. And he's going to be somebody that I think could take another step this year. And you also have Gabriel Relaford, who continues to push. Basically, the edge spots on this defensive line are in a good spot between the guys that they have coming back and the guys you're seeing maybe emerge, like a Gabriel Relaford. Those are guys who have opportunities to really battle and it be a good, healthy competition, whereas there's competition all over the team, cliche and all that, but you have so many players that have to continue to develop and get just so much better, which is where you need to bring in transfers to address these positions like defense tackle and corner. At certain spots, you're feeling a little bit better about them because LSU does have some depth, talent, and competition. So across the board, LSU, it's going to be a defensive season that hopefully you feel better about by the end as this group develops. But overall, this offense is going to need to really step up once again because there are so many questions right now until things get addressed in the transfer portal with the defensive line. So, to close out, I thought Deshaun Womack impressed. I felt Paris Shand impressed. PJ Woodland, I felt like a couple of them were like late throws that kind of allowed him to break up passes when AJ Swan was in there. But overall, I felt like it was kind of as reported throughout the spring as far as how the spring game went. So not too much else to share. And again, I didn't want to take up too much, but here I am about 12 minutes now. So we can talk a lot more as the offseason unfolds, but let's get you guys over to our interview with Andy Staples, Von 3's national team. Really good conversation with him. So enjoy this conversation with Andy Staples, and thanks for listening to the Bengal Tiger Podcast. Welcome back to the Bengal Tiger Podcast. I am Billy Embody, now happy to be joined by On 3's Andy Staples. If you're not following his show on the On 3 YouTube channel, definitely go subscribe to that. You can follow that wherever podcasts are found as well. Andy, thanks so much for the time. Spring football is in the books, NFL draft. Exciting times for the peak off-season threads now.
Oh, yeah. This is where everybody's awesome and all changes are going to work. And, every single new coach is going to be very successful. All new defenses will be aggressive and multiple. They're going to be an attacking defense and not a read and react defense. So, listen, this really is the greatest of all possible times.
And we had you on this week because we want to talk NFL draft, which we will later on. But let's rewind it a little bit back to LSU's spring game. What were some of your key takeaways from that? Obviously, we talked before this started about the defense briefly, and your opening comments kind of alluded to it. LSU about to be aggressive, about to be a top flight, top 25 defense.
Wait, I thought they were an aggressive attacking defense before.
Yeah.
Just they didn't stop anybody.
That was
that's the thing. Like Blake Baker, he's got to turn that around. It can't. I don't know. It honestly can't be much worse than it was last year. So, but hard to tell based on a spring game. We saw one giant coverage bust, which led to a long touchdown pass. But that again, spring games. I feel like you tilt spring games toward the offense because people like to see touchdowns and yards. Now, I noticed that Lincoln Riley's spring game featured 4 interceptions, which if you've been that bad on defense that many years in a row, it's probably great to let your defense cook a little bit in the spring game. But, I don't know. That what I want to see out of this defense is just some basic competency in the secondary, which we've not seen, which is just bizarre to watch at LSU. Because LSU had always felt like there was just a backlog of corners ready to come in and play. And they've been, having to take guys out of the portal, and they just haven't really been able to put together a solid back end in a while. And then also, I really thought they'd be better getting after the quarterback last year, and they weren't. And we'll see. I'm the guy who went on here and ranted after the Florida State game, like, why don't you just let Harold Perkins do the thing he's good at? And so that's the part I want to see. How do they adjust to that? How do they use Harold Perkins in this defense? That's really, what I'm curious about.
And look, Blake Baker, a lot of this defensive staff that they brought in, they've got skins on the wall. They've got the pedigree that you want. Corey Raymond coming back is a big deal for LSU.
No, Blake Baker got torched by LSU last year, if we're being real about it.
And people,
but LSU's offense torched everybody, so that's not really saying anything.
Yeah. It is funny how you try to point out, little, I guess, pieces of whoever's agenda to make it fit. And if you're an LSU fan looking to upgrade the defense when they hired Blake Baker, you would say, well, what the heck? Brian Kelly just watched
the game we watched against him. It wasn't so great, but don't worry. Jayden Daniels and Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas did that to everybody.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They've got experience. They know what Blake Baker's defense can do against the best of the best. Let's just put it like that. But now they come in, they've got to address the defense tackle spot. They've got to address the secondary, and it's going to be a little bit of a wait to probably see that defense really emerge as a strong suit for LSU.
Yes, and it's been interesting to watch because I know they're bringing in D tackles on official visits from the portal. Everybody wants this is where that SEC rule that doesn't let you transfer from one SEC school to another and play right away. This is what's really affecting these teams because LSU, Texas, and Oklahoma all very much in the market for interior D linemen, and they can't take anybody from the SEC. So they're all kind of fishing from the same pond, and it's getting very interesting.
With SEC recruiting, defensive tackle is obviously one of the most incredibly competitive positions to do it at. It seems like this rule is kind of built in look, guys, we battle so much for high school defensive tackles. Let's not do this year round in the transfer portal too.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is because they've kicked around the idea of repealing it, and they keep coming back to, no, this actually makes our lives significantly easier for 2 months, 3 months out of the year. So maybe let's not make it worse because you would I do think, especially if you're out at LSU, if you're at Texas, if you're at Oklahoma, if you're at Georgia, Auburn, places like that, you wanted to play in the SEC. Part of the reason you picked the school that you're at is to play in the SEC. And so if that option is off the table to transfer to another SEC school, I think you're more likely to stay put. And that is probably controlling a lot of the movement, which again, it makes the competition that much more fierce when a Dominic Williams from TCU goes into the portal.
And I mean, the rich get richer that way too. SEC teams being able to raid a Big 12 team, that has a strong defensive lineman. That's where the transfer portal is still, we're seeing that divide with some of these upper echelon schools and trying to stockpile that talent. But LSU's working on that. What they're going to be working on too is just continuing to build that offense back into that high flying attack that they had with Jayden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, and all of them. What did you see from Garrett Nussmeier in the end-all be-all spring game that was held against?
He looked good. He looked good. He looked in command of the offense. And this is such an interesting situation. We've talked about it with Georgia and Carson Beck when he succeeded Stetson Bennett. It feels very rare in this day and age to have what used to be the very common quarterback ascension plan, where you have a guy who you had as a freshman who sat behind the really good quarterback who was a veteran, and then he ascends to the starting job. And you saw it with Carson Beck last year at Georgia. You're seeing it with Nussmeier this year at LSU. I don't see a lot of other places where you're seeing that. I mean, maybe Alex Orji's going to take over at Michigan, but it's feeling increasingly rare that that's how that works. And like Nussmeier in particular, because I would say in 2022, he was recognized as a guy who is an SEC quality starter. And so he could have gone somewhere else and decided to stay and wanted to succeed. Jayden Daniels wanted to play in this offense. So I think that's the part that LSU fans should take comfort in, is you've got a guy who's been around these players, who's been throwing to these receivers. There's chemistry there. And I think that's very helpful. And I think that helps him. You're not going to have that kind of cold restart like you had the first year of Jayden Daniels, which didn't look like the second year of Jayden Daniels. Like the first year of Joe Burrow didn't look like the second year of Joe Burrow either. And I don't think you have that kind of getting to know you phase with Garrett Nussmeier because he's already got to know everybody.
Yeah, it seems like he's been there a decade. He's waited his turn. It's rare in today's
in quarterback years, it is a decade.
Yeah, he's off his rookie deal. He's on to the next. I mean, and look, NIL world, I mean, maybe that makes a little sense. He is a starter. That's pretty much unquestioned at this point, especially AJ Swan, the way he looked. LSU has to replace this talented group of receivers. And you talked with Cortez Hankton. We'll go a little bit more in depth on that in a little bit. But Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, Aaron Anderson, they bring in CJ Daniels, Xavion Thomas, who had that long touchdown on the busted coverage. It's kind of a hodgepodge of guys that LSU's expecting to step up and somebody be the guy. Do you think, based on what you've seen and heard around the LSU circles, that is going to be the case?
Yeah, I think Kyron Lacey's ready to do that. I also think CJ Daniels is going to be very good for them. CJ Daniels was excellent at Liberty. And I think if you talk to the people at Liberty, they feel like he's capable of you go up a level in competition, he's still going to be just fine, especially when you put him with a good quarterback like Garrett Nussmeier. So I think LSU's going to be fine at receiver. Will they be as dominant as they were last year? That is going to be really hard. Like it's crazy to think that they had, 2019 with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and just an absolutely loaded receiver room. And then you get basically the same thing again in 2023. Like the idea of a couple first rounders running around in your receiver room, it doesn't happen that often for most teams. I guess Ohio State, it happens almost every year now, but LSU is making it a fairly common thing. And so when you look at Lacey and you look at Daniels, their size, like they're scary out there on the outside. And so I don't know that there's going to be as big of a drop off as everybody, probably as LSU's opponents are hoping that there's going to be. I think you add the fact that you've got an experienced quarterback to these guys that are big, are fast. They've also, and this is something I talked to Cortez Hankton about, they've watched Malik Nabers and Brian Thomas work their way into becoming first-round draft picks. Like they've seen that happen before their eyes. So they have a really good idea of what it takes. And I think a lot of cases, nobody, you don't know what it takes until you've seen it. They understand that perfectly now. So I would imagine those guys are, one, following the example that was set for them, but also they're talking to those guys. They're talking to BT and to Nabers as they go into the NFL and getting more information that I think will probably help them and push them and motivate them going forward. Because that's the thing. I mean, having that as an example is pretty incredible.
4 returning starters on the offensive line. They bring back Mason Taylor at tight end. Is this offense good enough, coupled with what we're at least at present day seeing from the defense? Is this going to be good enough to get them back to Atlanta?
Well, you think about with, granted, a Heisman Trophy winner and 2 first-rounders at receiver, but the worst defense they've ever had, they still won 10 games. So I'm pretty confident that LSU is going to be in the mix. I don't know, like Atlanta, especially when you add Texas and Oklahoma into the mix, I don't know that Atlanta is as achievable as maybe it felt like going into last year. But it is possible. It's just because we don't know at this point, we don't know what Ole Miss is going to be necessarily. We think they've upgraded, significantly at the line of scrimmage, and they already had pretty good skill position talent. Texas comes in with pretty much everything they need. They're replacing 2 really good D tackles, but they felt like they had some guys, and then they're still trying to build depth, obviously, through the portal. Georgia and Alabama are going to be really good. Like getting to Atlanta is going to be very difficult and probably is going to require a good bouncer too. The better question, I think, for the LSUs of the world, the Tennessees of the world, the Ole Misses of the world, Can you get double-digit wins in the regular season and make the playoff? Because if you're a 10-win team in the SEC, you're making the playoff. And I think there's going to be 3 or 4 SEC teams in the playoff. So are you one of those is the question. And LSU absolutely can be one of those.
And this SEC landscape that we're going to see for the first time with Texas and Oklahoma involved, do you see that week-to-week grind for a Texas and an Oklahoma impacting them that much comparatively to the Big 12? And obviously those are two programs in different kind of stages of both stats.
Yeah, I mean, the Texas roster is as good as any SEC roster.
Yeah.
Like they stack up pretty favorably with Alabama, LSU, Georgia, the really good rosters in the SEC. They seem like they would be less susceptible to the week in, week out grind. Oklahoma, if it were last year's Oklahoma team with those veteran offensive linemen with like Tyler Guyton at tackle and guys who are going to be potentially high round draft picks on the offensive line, that's a bit different story, but they're rebuilding that offensive line this year. And this kind of Brent Venables' mandate is you can't ever have this again. Like you have to have offensive linemen in the pipeline. You have to have defensive linemen in the pipeline. You have to be able to reload. And I don't know that they're there right now. I still think they're going to be pretty good. I'm excited to see Jackson Arnold take over at quarterback. I know he had a ton of turnovers in the bowl game, but I also think he showed flashes of what he can be, which is a very good quarterback. So that's one of those, like LSU plays them at the end of the season. Like, what's Oklahoma going to look like at season's end? Because, we don't know how that offensive line is going to come together. Their center got hurt in spring. They think they're going to get him back, but it's one of those deals where I think Texas is probably better prepared roster-wise to go into the SEC than Oklahoma is right now.
I asked you this earlier this year on another podcast, but what's your early top 4? Let's do the top 4 that you see if there was another college football playoff with just 4 spots. I'm not going to ask you for a full-blown 12.
Yeah, it's interesting because like if you go to FanDuel and you look at their win totals, there's 4 teams that have 10.5. That's the most anybody has. And it's Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, and Texas. Ohio State and Oregon feels like a very good pick at the top of the Big Ten. Like it feels like we may see them play twice. They play in Eugene in the regular season. It feels like we may see them play in the Big Ten championship game because Michigan's going to be really good on defense. Offense is a bit of a mixed bag because we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I think they're going to be able to run the ball just fine. I think they're going to be pretty good on the offensive line. And then we don't know what the new Penn State offense is going to look like under Andy Kotelnicki. So Big Ten, I think the safest bets there are Oregon and Ohio State, and those two probably are 2 of the best 4 teams if they're the 2 best in the Big Ten. The SEC, Georgia feels like the most complete of the bunch, but Alabama returns so much. And it's crazy because we're going to watch the draft, and there are going to be so many Alabama players taken in the first round. We're going to think, how in the world are they going to reload after this? They lost Caleb Downs. They lost Nick Saban, for God's sake. But I think if you look at Alabama's roster, once they hit the field, you're like, oh, no, they just found a bunch more aliens in recruiting to play corner. Like, I don't know where all these 6'2", 200-pound guys come from, but they find them. And so I do think Alabama's gonna be very good and a much tougher out than I think that when Nick Saban retired, people were like, okay, now it's not impossible to beat them anymore. And it's not, but I actually think Kalen DeBoer is going to be a very good replacement for Nick Saban. So don't discount that. I think the Texas thing, we'll see, but Georgia and Texas both have pretty tough schedules. And Georgia, I think, has the toughest in terms of where they play because they're at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas. Like, so Georgia could be the best team in the SEC, but it could be 10-2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one, we're going to have the comment section going off on the Kalen DeBoer takes, which is awesome. We love it.
You go ahead and assume he's going to stink.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's lost 12 games as a head coach.
No, I don't think there's going to be everybody talks about how Bama had dropped off here and there at the end of Nick Saban's tenure or whatever. they weren't as consistent. Hey, that's the college football playoff. That's the transfer.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real here. If Alabama can snap the ball in the Rose Bowl, they're the national champs last year.
Yeah, that's a good point. Look, when it comes to the NFL draft, as we gonna move along, I did want to talk a lot about what you chatted with Cortez Hankton about, and that is his development, and that's something that we've hammered on with the Bengal Tiger, our subscribers, what Cortez Hankton's been able to do with his group of receivers. You got even more in depth with him on your show. What were your takeaways about his ability to develop these stud receivers that he's going to have plenty of them running around in the NFL by the end of the weekend?
It's ID and develop. It's ID and recruiting as well, because he was having to stand on the table for AD Mitchell. He said this was not a guy that was an obvious ready-made guy, and he wanted AD Mitchell at Georgia, and AD Mitchell obviously wound up transferring to Texas, but remember, was catching touchdown passes in national title games for Georgia. And now AD Mitchell may be a first-round draft pick. Ladd McConkey is one that Kirby Smart and Cortez Hankton were very high on, and maybe not anybody else was. I think Vandy offered him there at the end of his recruitment. He grew up a Tennessee fan, and he took a visit there and was hoping for the offer and didn't get it. But look at what they did with Ladd McConkey. And he's potentially either a low first, high second round draft pick. Like, he was dominant when he was healthy in college. And so, yeah. And really look at the development of Brian Thomas Jr., who is a phenomenal athlete who, by the end of last season, was also a phenomenal technical wide receiver. So it's very interesting to watch. And Cortez has quite a resume already. And when you think about it, because he did play pro ball for a while, like, he's still fairly young in his coaching career. And so it's pretty exciting to think about what he can do with some, like the guys we were talking about earlier, with the Kyron Lacey's, with the CJ Daniels, when he gets his hands on them.
Absolutely. And look, I watched Cortez Hankton for a little bit there when he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's got some people.
He holds every receiving record at Texas Southern, basically. So, like, Michael Strahan has every sack record, and Cortez Hankton has every receiving record.
Hey, those are two pretty good guys. I feel like Cortez could eventually be on TV too. So,
he's definitely got that quality, but I think that probably more showing up on your TV as a head coach would be more like it.
Yeah, one day maybe, if he keeps this up. And with the NFL draft approaching and the mock drafts coming out, you submitted yours to On3. It's online for those of you who want to go out there and find it.
This is my first one. I would say be kind, but I know everybody won't.
Look, I think they're going to give you a little bit of grief with the headline around JJ McCarthy, but you know what? That's a discussion for.
I think the Michigan fans will. I don't know if the other ones will.
Yeah,
because my headline is basically who's going to get fleeced so they can trade up to take JJ McCarthy. And my theory is that they actually don't trade up that far. That, like, the Bears fleece somebody, and they take whoever it is, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, whoever wants a quarterback trades up to get him at like 9. I don't necessarily buy that quarterbacks can go 1, 2, 3, 4, because everybody keeps saying that, the Cardinals are going to trade back and that team will take JJ McCarthy, whoever trades with the Cardinals. I don't know that you need to do that. I think you can probably, because once you get to the Cardinals, there's a bunch of teams that don't need a quarterback. So why would you deal with them when you could deal with somebody lower down and not have to pay as much to get him? But I had Jayden Daniels going to the Commanders because Caleb Williams, to me, is the obvious number one. But Jayden Daniels played his way into the number 2 spot for me. Now, it may be that Cliff Kingsbury, who's the OC of the Commanders, wants what he wants at quarterback, or maybe the Patriots want something different than Drake May at quarterback. But I had them there because I would take I would take Jayden Daniels. Got CJ Daniels on right now. I would take Jayden Daniels over Drake May. Like, Jayden Daniels comes up big when you need him to. Drake May didn't always do that at North Carolina.
Yep.
Like Jayden Daniels, and the thing is, you can say, well, Jayden Daniels had the uneven career at Arizona State. Yeah. When you put talent around him at Arizona State as a freshman, he was awesome. When you're throwing to Brandon Ayuk, when you've got Eno Benjamin in the backfield, like he was great. Could it be that Arizona State was in a period of, well, we don't know if we're going to fire our coach. Oh, wait, we are going to fire our coach. For the last 2 years, Jayden Daniels was there. Like
it was a mess.
I think when we finally got to see what he could be, and I think part of that was also, and we talked about this on my show with Cody Belair and Charles Power. Cody was talking about some of the stuff that Jayden did between last season, or between 22 and 23, to get better. All of the VR stuff and some of the off-field stuff he was doing. The thing about that is, I think having that COVID year really benefited Jayden Daniels. He needed that extra year in college to kind of unlock who he was and show what he could be. And, you can say, well, that's just dumb luck that it happened that way and he got that extra, but he got it. And now he's a much more mature quarterback. Like, he would have been drafted in the NFL after last year. It would not have been super high. But would he have been ready for it? I contend he's ready to step in and start in the NFL right now, based on what we've seen.
Yeah, I think for me, Jayden Daniels isn't suddenly going to be, a thick quarterback that is.
No, he's gonna be a skinny guy. Like, that's who he is.
It's not. So it's like now or never, and that's kind of the case with a lot of these quarterbacks. Yes, you'd love to go the Aaron Rodgers route and sit somebody for however many years it was behind Brett Favre as you make your transition plan.
Or the Jordan Love route.
Yes, or Jordan Love. Same team. Like, that's not the way it goes most of the time. And you can generally find out pretty quickly if a guy's going to have it or not. There's it can be that apparent because the game is so fast at that level.
Well, I also think Jayden Daniels comes from a little bit different experience than a lot of these Heisman winning quarterbacks, because, a lot of the Heisman guys made the playoff. I guess Caleb Williams didn't make the playoff. He almost did. They would have made it if they'd won the Pac-12 championship. But Jayden Daniels played on a team that had deficiencies the year he won the Heisman. Like, in the NFL, you're almost always going to have deficiencies. And if you're drafted very high, you're certainly going to a team that has deficiencies. So you got to figure out how to overcome that and be the best you can be in spite of that. And I think that's what you saw last year with Jayden Daniels at LSU. Like, he couldn't control what happened on defense. He could only control what happened when he got back out there. And he put them in a position to win games every time he got back out there.
And that's a really impressive piece to the puzzle with Jayden Daniels. And we'll obviously be following it all to see if it translates to the NFL. And it is harder because, you're in control of your roster, but you're also not too. You're
right.
And that's any player, but it's just a different way to build a roster.
Well, and that line was a sieve. If it is the Commanders, that's like, his mobility may save his butt a few times. And they probably need some mobility to avoid all the sacks that Sam Howell's like. And Sam Howell's actually a pretty decent runner.
Yeah.
But he's not as good as Jayden Daniels.
No, not at all. And hey, hopefully if that's where he ends up, it ends up a little bit better than the last athletic quarterback for Washington and RG3. Poor RG3. You did have Malik Nabers, Brian Thomas in there as well in your mock draft. Two teams.
Yeah, poor Malik Nabers. I sent him to the Giants. Now you're the featured receiver.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Showtime.
But you're also you're bracketed every play because there's no other weapons that they're particular. Although Wan'Dale Robinson kind of showed up a little bit at the end of last season. So maybe that helps, but the Giants need somebody who can make plays, who can scare you on the outside. That's who Malik Nabers is. So that's why I put him there. We could see him go to the Cardinals. We could see him if the Titans decide not to take a tackle. We could see that too. I think that the receiver thing is very hard to judge. It's pretty much what flavor do you want? So do the Cardinals want Marvin Harrison, Malik Nabers, or Rome Odunze? I don't think you're really going wrong with any of those. It's just which one you think fits your offense the best.
100%. And Brian Thomas going to the Jags, they need a little bit of help there as always. It seems,
but it feels like they only need a little bit. Yeah, like you add a little more playmaking juice to the Jags, and suddenly because they should have made the playoffs last year, they collapsed down the stretch. But I think Trevor Lawrence is the guy at quarterback. I think he's going to be fine, and the rest of the pieces are good. Like if you add that one more threat on the outside who can really scare a defense, who can stretch the field, I think that makes a huge difference. I think Brian Thomas, if he's the one going to the Jags, could be a really impactful draft pick, like one of the more impactful draft picks this year, because that feels like an ingredient that the Jags are missing, that if you suddenly add it, they become not just a good team, but a team that can compete for the AFC title.
Are you a Jags fan? Is that
No.
Where does your fandom lie?
I live 70 miles from Jacksonville, so I hear about them a lot. But no, I actually grew up a Dolphins fan. So weirdly, living in Columbia, South Carolina, very early in life, I was a big Dan Marino guy. And then we moved to Key Largo, Florida. So then they were my hometown team. So right after we moved, 1985, we just moved down there. My stepdad goes, I got tickets to the game tonight. It was Monday Night Football. Dolphins Bears. It's the only game the Bears lost in the 85 season, and the Dolphins put it on them. And that was my first Dolphins game in person. Now, I don't have a huge Dolphins fandom anymore because they've kind of staggered through the wilderness, though they were fun to watch on offense last year. But they lost so much through free agency. I'm not sure how good they're going to be this year.
Well, we can always keep you around for some NFL takes, but we'll bring you back for sure for the LSU.
Yeah, I would lean heavier on my college football takes than my NFL takes.
Well, same here. I mean, you should have seen my fantasy teams last year. Not great, but that's auto draft.
We get too sentimental about guys we loved in college. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm like that. You know what? This guy's going to help them. He's the.
Well, I'll tell you right now. If you read my mock draft, you're going to look at it and you go, I can't believe he has Zach Frazier going to the Steelers in the first round. Because I love Zach Frazier. That's why.
Look,
and I'm thinking Pittsburgh's right next to Morgantown. They've heard the legends of Zach Frazier, and it's got to happen. Like, it's the perfect marriage.
People on message boards and kind of across Twitter, whatever, they all say, trust the coaches or trust the people involved. And then you see some of the videos resurface of draft rooms when they're celebrating X player. They're like, we got our guy. He fell to us. Or, oh, man, we're able to trade up and get him. Bust. Like, look, there are so many different stories that are going to unfold draft night. And
they don't know